This week, all my heroes come from Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. The Bluebell Inn is the birthplace of the notorious highwayman Dick Turpin, but I'm here in Hempstead in Essex on the trail of somebody much more interesting. Inside this village church lie the remains of one of England's greatest scientists. He was a man of great brilliance and also of great courage, because he had the guts to say that 1400 years of scientific thinking was wrong. In doing so, he established one of the key facts about the human body and founded modern medical science. His name was William Harvey. Harvey became chief physician at St Bartholomew's Hospital, physician extraordinary to James I and physician ordinary to Charles I. His wife owned a talking parrot, and he may have been one of the first people in England to get addicted to coffee. Dick Turpin was baptised in this very church in 1705, but what I want to show you is just up here. Look at this, the remains of William Harvey in this wonderful marble sarcophagus. And do you know there are 49 other dead Harveys in the crypt down below? William Harvey went to Cambridge and in 1599 had a nasty attack of the quartan ague. We'd call it malaria. It was common in those days because of the marshy fens. But he must have made a pretty good recovery, because the very next year, 1600, he went to Padua in Italy to pick up the latest medical ideas, even though they were more than 1,000 years old. At Padua, he was taught by the great Fabricius de Aquapendente, who'd invented the anatomy theatre, where students in the 7th row were only 25 feet from the corpse. His methods may have been up to date, but his medical ideas were based on classical authority, and for blood circulation the top man was Galen, a Greco-Roman physician who'd worked in the 2nd century AD. This was what Harvey had learned about Galen's blood flow system. They'd cut open hearts and they realised that there were two halves of them, that was obvious, and one half was connected to the veins and the other half was connected to the arteries. Now, Galen said that the blood, which was made in the liver, flowed down the veins into the body. This yellow thing is my body, by the way. I'm a bit bigger than that, but not much. I've had a little bleed here, a little hemorrhage, but don't worry, we'll soon sort it out. That happened during the day, and then during the night it flowed back up, or ebbed back up, if you like, into the heart. And then the next day it went down again into the body, and then the next night it went back up, just like the tides, really, slowly up and down, and all the time refreshing the body. On the other side, on the arterial side, this was just full of air, they thought, and when a hot air went out of the heart, it went into the lungs. This red balloon is my lungs, and filled up the lungs, and then you breathed out all that hot air, and you breathed in nice, cool air, and it came into the heart, and it cooled down the heart, and perhaps a little bit of it leaked through. There were some little pores or holes between the two sides, and that might have helped refresh the blood. Now, Harvey realised this must be nonsense, and he proved his point using arithmetic. Now, Harvey had cut up a lot of animals, and he realised that the heart must be a pump, and that in humans it pumped about this much, about 2 ounces or 60 mils every beat. Now, there are about 60 beats a minute, and that meant that in a minute it pumped about this much, about 7 pints a minute. And that means that every hour it'll pump about this water butt full, 200 litres. Now, I'm a big chap, but this water butt's bigger than me. Obviously, the liver couldn't make that much blood, and that's only an hour's worth. And if it's got to seep down towards my extremities for 12 hours, well, I've got hollow legs, but I can't fit in that much. Obviously, it was ridiculous. Harvey realised that the heart must use just a small amount of blood over and over again. William Harvey finally published his ideas in 1628 in his great anatomical essay on the motion of the heart and blood in animals. It changed the way we think about the body and established debate and experiment rather than ancient authority as the way to get at the truth in medicine. Harvey came up with a complete system for the circulation of the blood. Fabricius had noticed some little lumps on the veins, and he thought they were constrictions to stop the blood flowing too fast down to the extremities. Well, Harvey didn't really believe that, so he took some veins out of various animals and examined them and found that these lumps were actually valves. They allowed the blood to flow up, but they completely prevented it from flowing down, so the only thing the veins could be doing was bringing the blood back up to the heart. Now, it followed that the arteries were not full of air but full of blood, and it was flowing down the arteries and back up the veins. Now, let me just take you round the circuit of one little bit of blood. It's starting here on the left side, and it goes up here through the aorta, through this artery, all the way down to, let us say, my left thigh here, where it's being used to pump as I pedal. Okay, and from there it gets pulled up into the right side of the heart. There it goes, used up and ready to be filled with oxygen again. Then the right side closes up, and here goes this bit of blood up here and into the lungs, which blow up and oxygenate the blood, and then it goes from the lungs out down this way into the left-hand side of the heart, ready to begin the cycle all over again. It's a relatively simple circulatory system, but it overthrew 1400 years of nonsense. This is Suffolk, windmill territory. A couple of hundred years ago, the countryside here sprouted windmills like my garden sprouts weeds. All sorts of different designs: post mills, smock mills, tower mills. This is Saxted Green, and this is a post mill. When this mill was first built in 1287, it actually cost £9, 13 shillings and 10 halfpenny, and it was lower then. The bottoms of the sails were so close to the ground they would actually hit a pig. I hope that was in theory, not in practice. The trouble is, windmills aren't much good unless they face the wind. This is a post mill. The whole top part turns to face the wind, powered by the blue fantail, if the wind is strong enough. But it's complicated and expensive, so the challenge was to come up with a much simpler design. And my favourite one, of all the various designs I've seen, was a design that didn't have to be turned into the wind. It didn't suffer from the problem that post mills did, and it was patented in 1783 by Benjamin Wiseman Jr. Now, I know that sounds like an American, but that's what he actually said on his patent. He was a merchant from Dis, and this is my version of his mill. And if you look at it, it's like 4 sailing boats, all sailing round in a small circle. I followed the magnificent design in his patent, although I've used bin liners and bicycle bits instead of fir and oak. And as they sail round, first of all, the wind's coming from about there, so that this sail is just flapping because it's facing straight into the wind. As it comes round towards you, it fills with wind from this side. It's just as though I was sailing a boat round in a circle. And as it goes down here, suddenly the wind will get the other side of the sail and it'll crash across. There, it's jibed. Look at this one do it. The wind's filling this side, and as it comes, the wind gets on the back of the sail and it'll suddenly jibe across, and the wind pushes it round. And so when the wind blows, there is actually push on 3 of the 4 sails at any one time, and the whole thing goes zooming round. So it's wonderfully efficient. In fact, it goes round a lot faster than the old post mill. It's quite impressive, that. Now, the great advantage of this was that it didn't matter which way the wind came from. I mean, if the wind is now coming from there, if the wind shifts to there, I don't have to turn this thing round. It'll still keep turning. It's automatic. Now, mills like that were always used to do work, usually to grind corn, and I thought maybe I should try and grind perhaps some coffee. Now, you may not believe that I'm grinding coffee, but just look at that. Ah! Oh, I've lost most of it. I'm glad to say that Benjamin Wiseman's basic idea has been adopted in a modern windmill. And here it is, or here is my model of a Reading rotor. You can see it's got a vertical axis just like Benjamin Wiseman, and it's got 2 sails like this, each of which has an aerofoil section like an aeroplane wing. That's one, and here's the other one. And what happens is that it sits still if you don't move it, but as long as the wind is blowing, when you give it a push, it'll keep going. Watch this. Give it a little push, and you think I just gave it a big push. No, no, as long as the wind blows, that will keep turning round. Full-size Reading rotors have been built, very elegant, but eventually they shake themselves to pieces. So the wind farms today all use things like big fans. And isn't it sad that they aren't all made of 4 boats sailing round in a circle, like this beautiful design of 1783 by Benjamin Wiseman Jr. My next hero invented the weather forecast. He was a naval man, a brave and gallant sea captain and a brilliant sailor, But as Charles Darwin found out, he was a very difficult man to live with, and he came to a tragic end. His name was Robert Fitzroy. Fitzroy was born at Ampton Hall, right here, just a few miles north of Bury St Edmunds. He went to Naval College and then to sea, and at the age of 23 he was given his first command, a survey ship, the Beagle. The Beagle was only 100 feet long and carried a total crew of 74, including a carpenter, a blacksmith and a missionary. After a curious selection process, he offered the post of ship's naturalist to a young gentleman called Charles Darwin. Neither of them knew the voyage would last 5 years, nor that Darwin would, as a result of it, write his wildly controversial Origin of Species. Back in England, he started his most heroic work, for in 1854 he became head of the meteorological department of the Board of Trade, and in 1861 he invented the weather forecast. Fitzroy knew that for seafarers the weather can be a matter of life and death, but there was very little good weather information. So he arranged for coastal stations around the country, including the RNLI here at Sheringham, to be supplied with Fitzroy barometers and to send him regular reports. Now, once he started getting all this information in, he was able to compile what he called synoptic charts of the weather. And he explains how they worked in this. This is his book, The Weather Book, published by him in 1863. And if you want a really clear, concise, simple account of how the weather works, well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but he does explain how he drew up his synoptic charts, and let me show you one of them here. This is a bit like the weather maps on the telly, really. It's basically a map of Europe. There's mainland Europe, and here's the British Isles, here's Ireland, and these straight lines represent the wind speed and direction. Now, this is a particularly important one because this was for October the 26th, 1859. And at 3 o'clock that morning, a ship called the Royal Charter was coming into Liverpool and ran into a terrible storm off Anglesey. And she went down. 400 people died, and they lost £500,000 worth of gold bullion. Fitzroy wrote a report about the shipwreck, and he said he could have predicted the storm 12 hours in advance from his synoptic chart. So then the Board of Trade suggested that he should issue storm warnings, and he devised a system to do it. And this is what it was. This is a north cone. You can see it's a cone, it's the same however I turn it round, and it points upwards, that's north. If you turn it over, it would be a south cone. And he devised this because it didn't matter whether you looked from that way or that way, it always looked like a cone. And this suggested there would be a gale from the north shortly. Turn it over, gale from the south. And the other thing he suggested was that you should hoist a drum like this. Let me just hoist that. You should hoist a drum like that when you didn't know which direction the wind was coming from or if it was going to veer or back or whatever. So this was gales successively, he said. Or you could use a combination of the two, and now we've got a north cone and drum, and this suggests there will be storm force winds, probably starting with a northerly gale. So they'd asked him to issue storm warnings, but he went further than that and started to predict the weather. From August 1861, he regularly forecast the weather for 2 days ahead, and his forecasts were printed in the Times. But he remained touchy. As a fundamentalist Christian, he'd been seriously hurt when Darwin's Origin of Species was published in 1859, and then he was ridiculed because he kept getting the forecasts wrong. This is Flagstaff House, where the north and south cone warnings were hoisted until 20 years ago. Now, the trouble with weather forecasting is it's all too easy to get it wrong. Fitzroy was the pioneer, and he got it wrong even more often than they do today. People made a lot of fun of him. In 1864, questions were asked in the House of Commons, and even the Times said, "We must demand to be held free of any responsibility for the all too common failures which attend these prognostications." On the 30th of April, 1865, Admiral Robert Fitzroy took his razor, cut his throat, and died. I'm sure there are many exciting attractions at Thetford in Norfolk, but for me, there's only one place to visit. In the second half of the 19th century, water closets were just beginning to come in, and there was a lot of argument about how to keep things clean. You could have deodorizers to kill the smells, antiseptics to prevent decay, and disinfectants to kill the germs. But which was the most important? One man combined all three and made his name. John Jays. He was born in 1817. He became a seed merchant, a manufacturer of boots and shoes, and finally in 1871 an analytical chemist. In 1877 he patented Jay's fluid. When he died in 1892 he left only £585, 17 shillings and 10 pence. And yet the name John Jays lives on, because here in a secret laboratory in Thetford there are nearly 300 lavatories in a single room, flushing automatically, controlled by a computer, testing the efficiency of every new product. Lavatory hygiene is an international obsession, and the company Jays founded has to test its products in the appropriate appliance, including a combined toilet and sink from Japan, which uses your hand-washing water to fill the system. And these giant American loos with flapper valves, enormous systems, and seats generously sized for the transatlantic rear end. The product John Jays invented has been changed out of all recognition, but one thing hasn't changed. We're still prepared to pour an awful lot of money down the pan. There's no picture of him, but I guess my next hero had two sides to his character. On the one hand, he built this beautiful sawmill at Gunton Park in Norfolk, but he also had a sadistic streak. He was an iron founder from Saxthorpe, and his name was William Hayes. In the early 19th century, prisoners were benefiting from the new treadmill invented by another Norfolk man, William Cubitt. It was meant to help inmates exercise, but Hayes thought it was just too soft, so he patented his own version in 1823. He said you can use either a treadwheel or a system of cranks and levers, and I've built myself a system of cranks and levers because there's only one of me and it seemed easier really. So if you look at my feet, you'll see that as I tread up and down, the cranks and levers are cranking and levering, and round behind at the back of the table they're driving a flywheel round and round. He then said that in place of the rail on which prisoners normally rest their hands, he would arrange to connect them to the machinery so that they could work with their hands as much as with their feet. And you can see that I've got these broom handles here which are attached to these cranks down below, so I've got to push up and down. It's a bit like doing press-ups while walking upstairs. Hayes was very worried about insubordination. He was worried that the prisoners might just get off the treadmill without being given permission. So he arranged for the whole floor of the chamber to be hinged and counterbalanced so that if they stepped off, and let me just show you, I've just hinged a little bit of mine, an alarm bell would go off and an indicator would show in the governor's office so that immediately warders would sprint in and get them back to work again. But the really cunning thing about his plan, and indeed the principal point of his invention as he put it, was to pump water and to take the work outside the prison. Now, there'd been a serious problem because all the work that had been done inside the prison for the benefit of the prisoners and the prison staff. He thought he could redress the balance to society by taking the work outside and making things fairer for the outside traders. Now you'll see that behind my feet there are a couple of pumps, and I'm pumping water, and I'm pumping them through these enormous pipes out through the prison walls, and it might be 1,000 yards away, even though it's only about 1 yard, and driving an enormous water wheel. And that water wheel is being used to do work. And it doesn't matter what the work is, as he pointed out. It could be weaving or the spinning of worsted or yarn. It could be cylindering or calendering, or the common process of preparing bombazines. So there you have it, William Hayes' ingenious device for the occupation of prisoners. I'm expecting an order from the Home Office any day now. Some of my heroes produce just one brilliant idea or invention. Others are amazingly prolific. Here comes a chap who in the early 1800s wrote no less than 56 scientific papers on subjects ranging from fairy rings in the garden and the dark lines in the spectrum of the sun to why the eyes of a portrait on the wall seem to follow you round the room. He made a fortune on platinum and invented or discovered 2 new metallic elements. he invented the reflecting goniometer and a telescopic blowpipe. But my favourite invention was of a device to help incompetent artists to draw. He was born right here in East Dereham, and his name was William Hyde Wollaston. William was born on the 6th of August 1766, the third of 17 children. His dad was rector at Dereham and a distinguished astronomer. This is where William grew up. At Cambridge, William was reader in Greek and Hebrew while he was studying medicine. He went on to practice medicine in Huntingdon, Bury St Edmunds and London. But he found he didn't enjoy practicing medicine very much. When his patients weren't very ill, he got cross with them. And when they were very ill, he got so sympathetic, he kept bursting into tears. So in 1800, he took a complete break. And he prescribed for himself a peaceful life. No stress. He vowed never to get married. And he went on a long walking holiday in the lakes with his friend Henry Hasted. But he was really sad because there's beautiful scenery in the lakes and he couldn't sketch it. He was a hopeless artist. So he invented a device to help him sketch the scenery. And this is it, the camera lucida. A camera obscura was a dark room in which you had a lens to make an image of the outside world. This is used in full daylight, still to make an image. And you can see this is just a wine bottle with a bit of glass stuck in the cork at an angle of 45 degrees. And that means that if I look through from here, I can see both the house and a reflection of my sketch pad. And in fact, surprisingly, it surprises me, it works better if you look down into it. Now, I look down there, I can see reflected in the glass an image of the house, and I can also see through the glass my sketch pad. So I can then sketch the house just like that, by tracing round the image I can see. Now, there's a slight disadvantage, as you'll notice, the image is upside down, because there's only one reflection in this piece of glass, and that therefore reflects the house upside down. Now, it's not a disaster, but it's a bit curious sketching it like this, because real life isn't upside down. Well, not most of the time, anyway. So then, he worked out this system, and all of these, incidentally, are described in his patent, a great range of them. And this, you can see, is two bits of glass, one here and one there. The bottom one is a mirror, and this is plain glass. And the angle between them is 135 degrees. Now, the idea is that you look down here, and through this bit of glass you see your picture, your distant view, reflected from there, and now it's the right way up. And you can also see your paper. So now you can look down and you can sketch very easily. The lovely thing is it sorts out all the perspective for you and everything, because you're simply tracing around the image that you see on the paper. It is amazing. I really have no artistic skill at all. Yeah, it's not bad. Right, here is a real treat, because here is an original early 19th century camera lucida as made under license for William Hyde Wollaston. Isn't that beautiful? Brass. Now you see it clamps on at the bottom, so I can clamp it directly onto my sketch pad and it won't move. And at the top here it swivels that way and that way, so you can get to exactly the right position. So I can look through this magnifying lens and I can draw a sketch. Many of his discoveries were more important, but what I like most about William Hyde Wollaston is his camera lucida, the device that lets duffers like me make elegant and beautiful sketches. I've come to Colchester to celebrate a hero who was not only one of the first physicists in England, but also personal physician to Queen Elizabeth I. His name was William Gilbert. William Gilbert was a real pioneer of the scientific method. He didn't claim a thing was true unless he could prove it by experiment. This is Timperley's, the house where Gilbert was born in Colchester. Now, he was clearly a brilliant physician, but he was also a brilliant physicist. And the reason he's a hero of mine is for all the experiments he did on magnetism. Now, here is a chunk of lodestone. They'd known about this for ages. It's an ore, a natural ore of iron. We now call it magnetite. And the funny thing about it is it's magnetic. It picks up paper clips. In fact, it'll pick up several paper clips. It's quite a strong magnet, this one. They're all stuck together. But it must have been a very mysterious, almost magical thing. And there were a whole load of legends and folklore associated with it. People said that lodestone would cure a headache, wonderful for hangovers, and it would bring back together warring couples, that it was stronger if you bathed it in goat's blood, and it didn't work at night, or if you rubbed it with garlic, or in the presence of diamond. Well, just look at this. We've got these paper clips on here. Here's a diamond, perfectly good diamond. Absolutely no effect. It works perfectly well in the presence of a diamond. Now, Gilbert was not content just to read that. He got together 70 diamonds and a whole load of learned witnesses, and he showed that the lodestone worked just as well with 70 diamonds around. He showed by experiment when things were right or wrong. He was very keen on the power of experiment. And one of the experiments he did was the effect of magnets on compasses. And we know that, you know, magnets have weird effects on compasses. You can see it spinning round. But if you look at it carefully, you'll see a rather interesting effect. Here the compass needle is pointing almost horizontal, and as you go round it points down and then points straight into the stone, and then across the top it's almost horizontal, and then on the other end it's pointing almost straight in again. And he went on to do a whole lot of experiments with this, a terrella, he called it, a ball-shaped magnet. He made them out of lodestone. This is made out of a piece of wood with a magnet shoved up the middle, but it has the same effect. And you can see again, the compass points, it's horizontal sort of in the middle, and then at the poles it dips right down, and it's horizontal again there. And actually, this is exactly the way that compass needles behave on Earth. Navigators knew that on Earth, compass needles dipped more the closer to the poles you went. But why did the Earth and the terrella behave in the same way? Before his time, people thought that when a compass needle pointed north, it was because of the heavens. The pole star was pulling it north, and he suddenly realized it wasn't that at all. It was being attracted by the Earth, and the Earth itself was a giant magnet. And it was when he came up with that brilliant idea that the Italian scientist Galileo Galilei said, "I greatly praise, admire, and envy this author, that a conception so stupendous should have come into his mind." And the poet John Dryden said, "Gilbert shall live till lodestones cease to draw." In his book, De Magnete, Gilbert wanted his readers to know just how much trouble he had gone to. Let them note the great multitude of experiments and discoveries, for it is chiefly these that cause all philosophy to flourish, and we have dug them up and demonstrated them with much pain and sleepless nights and great money expense. I know how he feels. Sorry, that's all the heroes for this week. See you next time!